Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of the Pinniped Community Meeting. Today's date is June 17th, 2021. Just a reminder to please read and abide by our code of conduct when attending these meetings. You can find these recordings of these meetings on our YouTube playlist. We record everyone, and so if you aren't able to attend these in person, you could catch up on YouTube, but we would love for you to join us at our community meetings. They're offered every first and third Thursday of the month at 9 a.m. Pacific time. When you do attend, we ask that you put your name and any organization that you're representing so that we can keep track of who from outside of the maintainers are joining and who from the community is joining, and we can keep the lines of communication open and just make sure we're able to engage with you after the meeting. And we just have one announcement to discuss. We released just a little bit of a bug fix for 0.9. This is the second bug or other things that were added to that particular release. Matt, did you want to, or anybody else want to go over this particular item?
Yeah, this was sort of a security hardening fix. So there doesn't fix any known vulnerabilities. We don't know of any vulnerabilities in Pinniped right now, but it hardens the code against some potential future vulnerabilities that we speculated could exist if there's things that we don't understand. So the way that the impersonation proxy works is it authenticates the user, it connects to it, and then it passes the request upstream to the Kubernetes API, and it sets some headers. And so that any kind of bug, again, we don't know about these kind of bugs, but any kind of bug that would cause those headers to be missing from the request, basically we want to mitigate the scenarios. So a couple of things we did. One thing we did is that the proxy itself now does a Kubernetes authorization check on every request. Previously, it only did that on a subset of requests related to nested impersonation. Authorizes every request, which means even if we totally mess up the backend part of the proxy, you still can't make requests that you aren't authorized to make. So that's good. We also now, when we do the upstream impersonation, we do it as a privilege service account that doesn't have any other privileges. So it can only do impersonation. Can't directly do anything else on the cluster. And then we also added code to detect when the underlying cluster has anonymous auth disabled. So the common one that we found is AKS, but any cluster that has Kubernetes API flag turned to disable anonymous auth, we also now reflect that behavior at the proxy. So we refuse any request that's not authenticated. So those are hardening stuff. Thanks to Mo for helping put all this together. We have some more items that we may tackle later, but these were sort of the highest value, quickest wins we could find.
Cool. Thanks, Matt. So on to project roadmap items for June. We have the remote OIDC login support. Anybody want to go over this?
Yeah, this is my thing again too. We talked some about this, but I don't think we talked about it at a community meeting yet. This is work that's in progress now. I've been working on this week. And I did a sort of a proof of concept last week based on this approach. The problem we're solving here is if you want to use the Pinniped CLI, so you want to like run kubectl against a Pinniped cluster, but you want to run that command on a machine that doesn't have a web browser, which is tricky because logging into your OIDC provider requires a web browser. So the scenario here is that you have one machine, it's like a jump host or an SSH jump box, where you're running the CLI, and you have another machine, maybe on your desktop, where you have a browser. And so we want to make that scenario work. And we had previously previously we had maybe overstepped our user story here and said, oh, we're going to implement device code flow, which is one technical approach to solving this. And this is another approach that we think is simpler and easier to implement in Pinniped, equally secure, and actually equally good user experience, roughly. So I don't know if it's worth going through all this right now. Do folks, yes, no? Andrew, I think you haven't heard this yet. Might be good validation for you, good validation from you. Okay. The basic trick here is we're going to use this standard part of OIDC called response mode. And so this is a parameter that the client sets when it's starting an authorization request. Normally you would specify like response type equals code, which means at the end of the flow, I want to get an authorization code back. Authorization mode is talking about how you want to receive the response. So the normal response mode is query, which means you want to be you want the issuer to issue a redirect and put the response parameters into the URL query parameters. You'll get in that way. The form post mode here means at the end of the login, the issuer renders an HTML form with the authorization code and the state and things like that, and then posts it to your domain, your callback. Anyway, that's boring. That's kind of standard OAuth behavior, and it's well supported in Faucite, so it's really easy for us to use it. Yep, it's in Faucite, and then the trick here, this is the only thing that we're kind of doing that's a little extra beyond the spec, is to take that HTML form that's rendered at the end and have it have two cases. One case where the form post succeeds automatically, which gets you basically the current behavior in most cases. So if you're running the CLI on the same machine as your web browser, it'll just post the results and you'll see the success message and you're done logging in. But if that post fails, you can fall back to showing a screen that contains the auth code to copy paste. And then the CLI can wait for that code to be copy pasted, and you can sort of finish the login out of band. Anyway, this is what I'm working on. If anybody has comments, it's not too late to change course. But I think this is still looking good so far. Yeah, any questions, comments?
Sounds cool.
Okay. The other item, AD support.
Guess I can take this one. So with version 090, we released generic LDAP support. The intention here is to create specific Active Directory support by validating that it works against Active Directory, kind of having an Active Directory test environment set up, and creating a different identity provider object with defaults and configuration that makes sense specifically for Active Directory. The update here is I have been working on trying to get an Active Directory test environment set up, and it's been difficult. Might pull someone in today to talk through things later.
Does anybody have anything else to say to that particular item?
Thanks for taking that one, Margot. we all knew this was going to be hard, and so not surprised that it's hard, but I'm glad that you're making progress.
Okay, on to an item that I pulled from the June 3rd meeting that we discussed. So I was just wondering if there was anything further to touch on.
I don't think so. We decided to bring this into the backlog. I'm going to work on it for, I think, the next release. And yeah, we'll have, this would be a small change. I think we'll probably support this in parallel with also offering plain YAML to download if that's what you still want. So you could still use kubectl to install. As we've made the project more complex, it's getting harder and harder to install it with like a single kubectl command. So we have a bug that's open right now as well that's has to do with the fact that we have a single YAML manifest where we define a CRD. So we define the credential issuer CRD. And then at the end of that YAML, we have an instance of that CRD, custom resource. That's the initial credential issuer. And CAP handles that just fine. I believe Helm handles that just fine. kubectl doesn't. And so you can make it work, but you sort of have to hack around it. You have to run the command twice, or you have to split the YAML up. Anyway, it's kind of annoying. What it points to is like, it would be nice if we had a nice suite of tools for managing all these configurations, like the Carvel suite. So we'll probably start to switch to referencing the Carvel tools as our default installation method on the website, but probably still offer the YAML with some caveats as a fallback.
Just to close the loop about a previous conversation about this image package feature, the VMware project that was looking to consume a Pinniped image package bundle actually rolled their own. So
yeah,
just to close the loop on that.
That's fine. I think there's lots of reasons for us to do this. I mean, it provides security and usability benefits, and it's useful to people who are invested in the rest of the Carvel suite. So you could install Pinniped with cap controller, for example, really easily, things like that. And even though your package might be different from our package upstream, if we're building them with the same tools, we should be able to catch things right away if there's any issues. Yeah, that is a good note. That we actually what that means for me is we probably wouldn't block our next release on this work if it turns out if it turns out to be like a time crunch at all. We might slip this.
Okay. Anything else on that particular item? Nope. Okay, on to discussion topics. If there is anything else that folks want to discuss while we're touching on this next point, please feel free to add that in below in the discussion topic section. For now, we're going to design for non-iterative LDAP plugins.
Yeah, sorry, I always end up talking too much. We've had this issue open for a little while, and it has a proposal for kind of what the feature should look like here in the issue. And we talked about this last week as a team, and we weren't confident that this is exactly what we wanted to build. So I thought we could take a few minutes to discuss what we want to build. So the actual goal of this feature, stepping back a little bit from what's in the doc right now, is that if I have an LDAP based identity provider and I've got it Pinniped all configured against it, and then I have a client that's like a CI/CD job, like a Jenkins job, for example, that wants to run a kubectl command to do a deploy. This would be a pretty common scenario. We want to have a way to give that job an LDAP service account. It's like username and password in the LDAP, and let that be wired into the Pinniped command with no user interaction. So right now, what would happen is your job would try to run the kubectl command. It would exec our CLI, and then we would show a username password prompt. And Jenkins can't type a username password prompt, so you would just block and it wouldn't work. So The specific design here that we maybe didn't all agree on is to pass the username and password through as environment variables, but to keep the names of those environment variables out of our design, out of our spec, sort of out of our API or CLI contract, by letting you specify what the names of the variables are, and then those would get into the kubeconfig, and then your CLI at runtime would try to read those variable names that you specified. I think some other alternatives, maybe just to open up the discussion, and then I'm gonna mute, is we could just pick specific variables. So we could say like Pinniped username, Pinniped password, or Pinniped LDAP username, Pinniped LDAP password. Or we could not use environment variables at all and specify a file with credentials, which is a little less convenient, but maybe has some security benefits. Because environment variables are, well, passing environment variables through command lines and shells can be tricky in some cases. Anyway, does anyone else have ideas or opinions? Okay.
I was gonna make one comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm trying to think of the case where, so the get kubeconfig command is probably going to be run by your IT admin, and then the kubeconfigs are going to be handed to end users, right? And let's presume to have an LDAP IDP configured, right? The end user is going to want probably to automate this if they can, right? Or something, right? Like you can imagine some flow where they're like, yeah, I just don't feel like typing my username and password. I'm like, this is my little box. I just want it to work. So it would be weird for the IT admin to pick the environment variables for them, but they could. I suppose that's I guess a vaguely valid thing to do. But let's say the IT admin didn't do that, and so now their kubeconfig is set up to prompt them, right? I don't really expect users to like know how to change these flags. It's like the Pinniped CLI is effectively opaque to them. They should hopefully not even know it exists, other than the fact that at some point they were told to install it, or in the really nice case, the IT admin just pushed it to their box using the agents that are probably installed on their laptop, right? So the case I could see this falling apart is the user doesn't really know that they're using Pinniped, and it's going to prompt them, which will make it very hard for them to automate scripts. And if it's a set of CLI flags that tell you which environment variables to set, that then requires you to modify the kubeconfig, which requires you to understand it. That's not necessarily great.
You could also, so we normally operate under the assumption that the person who runs the get kubeconfig command is like a cluster admin. But actually, even as a regular user, once you have your initial kubeconfig, even if it's a Pinniped kubeconfig, I forget what default RBAC we set up, but I think most users do have permission to run get kubeconfig again. So you could say like, oh, I gave you your user kubeconfig, but if I'm trying to set up a Jenkins job, I could say, okay, rerun the get kubeconfig command and generate Jenkins kubeconfig. I'm not sure. That's a little error prone because you're asking a user to understand that CLI command now. They didn't need to before.
I thought we required it to be able to read like credential issuers and maybe IDPs also. I don't remember.
I think it's just credential issuer, but I don't know. I don't remember if we set up any RBAC for that.
No, we don't set up any RBAC for it.
Okay, maybe that doesn't work.
One thing that comes to mind based on Mo's comment was one option would be to do exactly as you wrote in this GitHub issue, but to have the get kubeconfig command by default always set these two flags with some good default environment variable names. So that way like maybe the defaults are Pinniped username, something. So that way, if the administrator wants to override them when they're running get kubectl, they can. But if they don't, then the end user still has some environment variable names that they can set without having to edit their kubectl.
It's not a bad idea. I think Moyer had pointed out a concern in that flow, which was, or sort of related to that flow, is by making you opt in to the value of the environment variables. Like if you don't set, like if you don't have the end, like if you don't specify which envars to use, there's no way for like the, I guess, CLI to try to consume something it's not supposed to. Like you effectively have to like very hard opt in to this functionality. So like we're not trying to force you into a particular path. I don't know necessarily if that matters. Like it's really hard to do like host level security stuff, right? Like all the stuff that you're normally executing is running as your user and can like read your entire home directory. So it's like go to read your credentials off the disk if it really wanted to. Like it doesn't have to like wait for you to type your password in.
There's also another. So I'm also attracted to the category of things where you pass these things in as file paths, because it's like it's the most secure thing. It is annoying to use because you have to make those files, but actually there's also a workaround. There's a trick, and if you're using like a modern shell, a bash or whatever, you can use I forget what it's called. A redirect, so basically
process substitution, I think.
Process substitution, yeah, basically run a command, the output of which becomes a file descriptor that you can redirect to standard in, or to a file name, basically. Anyway, that trick is interesting because even then, even if the command that you specify is literally like cat this file name, or sorry, if it's sorry, even if the command you use is echo this environment variable, that looks like it would show up in your process table, but echo and all that stuff is all just shell built-ins, so it actually isn't in your process table. I don't know, that's a trick. Basically, if you build the file thing, you can also use it as an environment variable thing with this trick, and it's just equally secure, and it's more secure than or can be more secure than passing environment variables in directly. I don't know.
Do I remember right that with those file tricks, you have to make sure that you have your default permissions mask set up correctly, or else you can accidentally create world readable files that have your credentials in them?
That's true. Yeah.
That's a little tricky. At least with environment variables, they only live in the proc file system, which is pretty well protected.
Yeah, the trick, so environment variables, like the actual environment for each process is pretty well protected on like every modern machine. You have to be root to read that. The thing that's not protected is the process list. Like if I take, PS, AUX or whatever, and I list out running processes and see the command lines, those are not always protected across user boundaries. So if you run a shell command that has the secret in it, it might show up in process table that way.
Yeah.
We can't like stop anybody from ever doing any insecure thing. I just want to make sure that like we're setting people up to succeed. One other thought I had about this is I wonder if it's a mistake for us to use the word LDAP in this CLI flag, because right now the only kind of username password logins we support are LDAP logins. But we're about to add AD support. I don't know if we'll use the word AD. We also might support client credentials grants against OADC providers, in which case you'd have like a client ID and client secret that are like a username and password. And I might want to use an OADC service account, an OADC client as a service account in Jenkins. Anyway, I wonder maybe if we could pick different names than ones that use LDAP. or maybe not.
I would personally lean towards username and password or something like not including the word LDAP. For the simple case of we're about to add Active Directory at some point in the near future. And I wouldn't want to add 2 more flags that just simply exist to distinguish between LDAP and AD, even though there's no conceptual difference. Client ID and client secret are a little bit fuzzier. And like, I'd also thought about like if it would be possible for like if we add like GitHub support in the future, if it would be possible for us to like use like some kind of personal access token based flow. So that way you could theoretically do GitHub login without a browser as well. I guess in that case, I don't know what the username would be because it's just a token. And the token's not really a password, it's an access token. I guess in that case, I could see us just adding a new flag to distinguish between username and password, which are supposed to be supplied together, both non-empty, and then token, which is supposed to be supplied by itself, and not with username and password.
Yeah. Okay. I think, do we feel like we have consensus that we don't want to use the word LDAP? Maybe just use username password. If not
Raising my
everybody's
hand,
video.
you can't see me, but
Okay, good. Okay, all right. Well, I'll consider that like at least one change here. I am also maybe leaning now towards let's just pick a variable name and use that. We can always add files like file path support later too. We don't have to. It can coexist with this. But let's just pick a name that's like Pinniped underscore username, Pinniped underscore password. I mean, we're lucky that we have a project name that's very unique. There's not that many other things called Pinniped. So I don't think that's going to conflict.
let's see. I see Andrew and Ben are on the call. Do you guys see this being a problem for downstream consumers?
I can't really come up with a good answer right now, so no.
Like the thought I had in my head is no matter what environment variables we choose, if you're like embedding the Pinniped binary or using the code, there's no reason you can't do like translation and like fake those variables using other inputs that maybe files or other environment variables or whatever.
Yeah. In fact, we have another story open that's about refactoring our client to be a more usable as a Go library. And that basically the actual name that we're hard coding here might be on the CLI side of that API. So like it might be literally part of just what the Pinniped CLI does. And if you repackage the client into another binary, you choose a different name if you want.
Makes sense. Yeah. What about didn't y'all have a Pinniped debug environment variable that toggled some debug output?
Yeah, we could do the same thing with that. Potentially. I think it's also one of those things I think is the variable name is like read in the main.go in the CLI, and then it sets some flag into the rest of the client, I think.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. I think that pattern would vibe with what we would want to do with it.
We should, almost gonna make a note here. We should consider this story with documentation. Like we should have like a little section in our LDAP docs about how you could use this with Jenkins or whatever. Cool.
One other thought I had is like, we have to be careful about caching. Like if you unset the environment variables and then ran another kubectl command, I think I would expect to have to log in again.
Yeah, I think Margaret is right. I think what this boils down at the code level is, I think Moya wrote this code where there's like a concept of a cache key, and these would need to be considered in that. So that way, when you do the lookup in the cache, if these are different, you get a different key, and you don't hit the cache threads.
Yeah, that's interesting though, because the input here is secret and it's a potentially low entropy password secret. And so the way that cache key works right now is just a plain SHA-256 hash that's very fast. And the thing that it's hashing over doesn't have a lot of entropy other than your password. So it may not be, we may want to find a safer way to compute the cache key, like with a password hash.
Yeah.
I'll have to think more about this. That's a really good point, Margot. We need to think
I
more
think
about how
that's
that
an
should work.
that's an interesting thought. I'm not sure if I completely follow that. Like my username and password is something that I present interactively once, and then I don't present it again because it's all my resulting tokens are cached. So wouldn't you think of the environment variable in a similar way? Like I present the environment variable once, my resulting tokens get cached, and then I'm not presenting the environment variable again. I could or I could not. It doesn't matter. Like, what am I trying to say?
Maybe
You can have environment variables set that aren't read by any system, and that's okay. And you can also unset them. And if no system tries to read them, that's okay. Until the next time a system tries to read them, and then it's an error. It's kind of a normal way I think about environment variables.
Yeah, I guess that what that points out is our caching is making some assumptions about the interactive login case right now. That like basically if I run a command and it tries to log into a particular cluster using LDAP, I want to, and then I do the same thing again. I always want to reuse that cache if it's available. I don't want to like ask the user, hey, do you still want to log in as that user again? Like that username. So maybe in this case, we could either just completely ignore it, or maybe we could just cache based on the username header. So the username environment variable, not the password. So if you logged in once with one username, and then you logged in a second time with a different username, that would correctly like, so the bug that we don't want to avoid is I set the username to Jenkins, I run a command, then I set the username environment variable to Moyer, and I run another command thinking it's going to happen as me, but actually it runs as Jenkins because the Pinniped CLI incorrectly reuses the cache.
Oh, I see what you mean. I misunderstood Margot's comment. Now I understand.
I think
It's
just
a little
It
funny
feels
because we
like-
now have, sorry, Margaret, like we have CLI flags and environment variables that direct the behavior of the binary in a particular way. Whereas previously, I think we just mostly relied on CLI flags. Like you could say that the prompting of LDAP and username was like hidden, like it wasn't stored anywhere. It was just like you typed it into a buffer, and like nothing really recorded that occurring. So now we got this weird state where I think what Moira said is a scenario we want to be careful of, because I think we've all been standing beside a person or known of a person that's deleted a production environment because they thought they were deleting a dev environment. I think this is in that same vein.
I think we could, sorry, Margot, you were saying something.
I was just saying, this just kind of seems like a broader log out behavior kind of.
Yeah, this
Problem.
really makes me think we need a logout command. I think we should prioritize that.
I think we get around the scenario I mentioned. We get around if we just include the username in the cache key. So we do something similar for the static token login flow, which is that we include the static token's value as part of your cache key. So if you change the token, so I changed from like the Jenkins token to a Moyer token, one other use case is like I've got two terminal windows open, one where I'm interacting with the system as Jenkins and another where I'm interacting with it as me. We just want to make sure that those correctly share the cache. Anyway, I think we get around this by just hashing the username. We don't have any of the problems that are related to like a password. Because basically what the property that we know is if you have a username let's say Jenkins, and I change my password, I change the password, that could cause my login to fail or succeed, but it's really unlikely to log me in as a different user based on which password I choose. Right. My intention is to log in as Jenkins. I express that by setting the username. I'm not going to like magically be logged in as me because I typed in a magic password, at least not on any LDAP server that we know of. Sorry, it's confusing, but I took a bunch of notes in the main document here. I can take on rewriting this issue, and we can have a new design to work on next week. And if anybody has more thoughts, we can continue to discuss now, or we can discuss in the issue.
To Margot's earlier point, do we have a logout story in the icebox somewhere? That
I think we do
something
actually.
we've talked about several times. I don't think we've ever prioritized it.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's logout, the logout behavior, meaning just like delete your cached sessions completely. I also think we need to worry about having multiple concurrent sessions, like maybe in different terminal windows on the same machine should also work correctly. So I think what we want to avoid is having a command that you run in one terminal affect an environment in a negative way that you're running in another terminal, right? Like we shouldn't be commands that assume a single shared global current user session as much as possible. I think we have that right now with LDAP, but I'm not sure we want it. I'm not sure how to get around that, or if we need to support maybe like multiple session cache profiles or something like that. So that logout is one factor of that, one element of that, but I think there might be other commands in that same category that we might want to think about at the same time, like switch user or things like that. I don't know. I'm not that happy with like the Kubernetes style.
I was about to mention that, like, even after 5 years of working on Kube, I still find the kubeconfig context command and config commands very hard to understand. Like, I can never tell what they do.
Yeah, so let's open an issue about logout, and maybe we can just do logout. Maybe logout is simple because logout is just delete the file. Right?
Well, hold on. That's not what logout means to me. Logout means to me that you delete the cache and you tell the server to delete the session. It has to at least also revoke the session on the server, right? Because sometimes I log out because I like pasted my session into Slack on accident, and I need to fix that by logging out. Now, I do think that would be relatively easy to implement because I think there's an OAuth RFC that Faucet already supports. We just have to like wire it some way and give ourselves like an endpoint. I do think well, I think last time I checked, it is actually something that you can expose in the OIDC discovery. So it wouldn't even have to be like hard coding that like the supervisor / logout or something is the magical logout endpoint.
How would we do anything special if you log out and we like revoke your refresh token? Would we also, so in the future case where your downstream refresh token is linked to an upstream refresh token in OIDC, would we also do something with the server then also try to revoke the upstream one?
Maybe the only reason I don't immediately say yes is I've never fully investigated this, but if you look at the issues around this type of stuff in DEX, there seemed to be some concern that at least in some OIDC providers, in particular Google, a particular client and user combination was only allowed to have one refresh token active for all possible sessions. Meaning, if you log into two separate machines as Moyer through Google, logging out on one of them is not supposed to log out the other one, or maybe it is in some scenarios, but not always necessarily. Like you probably have to let the user choose what logout means in that case. But if you imagine you revoke this singleton upstream refresh thing, then you kind of get in this weird state where it like hoses a bunch of stuff that maybe wasn't supposed to, or maybe it is. I don't know. Like I certainly don't mind the capability of saying log out like all, like just nuke all my sessions everywhere, Pinniped kindly, because I don't know. I changed something, or I thought I lost something, and instead of trying to figure out what I lost, I'm just going to delete everything and start over. That's totally fine, but I don't know if that's like the default behavior. Like I don't know. If I was using Pinniped, me logging out of Pinniped shouldn't like log me on a Gmail. Like, I don't want that to happen. That's just annoying.
Okay, so there, it sounds like maybe there's just more discussion that will need to happen in that issue before we have actionable stories out of it. But we can start tracking that at the very least.
I do think we have a story somewhere about implementing logout. I think Pablo had asked for it, like, well, not like specifically asked for it, but he had made like I think a story about it at that time.
Okay, anything further on this particular item? All right, looks like there hasn't been any other discussion topics added. Does anybody have anything else they want to talk about before we head out? Nope. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for today's meeting and discussion. And if you're tuning in from home, watching this on YouTube, we do invite you to attend these live. We meet every first and third Thursday of the month at 9 a.m. Pacific time. That's just an opportunity for you to listen in on what the team is working on and also provide your own feedback on what they're working on, or if you're interested in helping out with any of these items, or if you have anything that you wish to discuss with the team on your end regarding Pinniped, this is just a great opportunity for all of that. Additionally, we are available on the Kubernetes Slack workspace in the Pinniped channel. And we are on Twitter at Project Pinniped. So there's just various opportunities for you to engage with the maintainers. And we do hope that you do reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. And with that, thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you all.